Anthony Moffitt, or Harry as you're better known as. Welcome to Straight Talk, mate.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
So I always want to know how someone's name goes from Anthony to Harry. In your surname, of course, is Moffitt. But tell me how that occurred. How did you get that nickname?
Yeah, so Harry came from an old Rodney Rude character. Harry Muff was his name, and a lot of people called me Moff, so it was Harry Moff in the end. And I don't think there was much of a likeness. It wasn't that funny, but
who named you?
A bloke by the name of Ken Studley on our SAS Selection course. He made up a poem and a rhyme about everyone. He's one of the funniest guys who you'll meet, and he was one that gave me the name in the poem.
And it stuck.
It stuck. Yeah, well, you resist these names and they stick harder, don't they?
Yes, totally. So that would have been in like the 80s?
1990. It
1990.
Was. Yeah.
Because I remember Rodney was, he had a radio show and TV show. I also remember Kerry closing one of his programs down, actually mid-program, because Kerry just didn't like the way he went on. But he was a funny bastard, I remember him. So you're in the mid-90s, you were, let's call it, trying out whatever the word is for SAS?
Yeah, attempting SAS selection, and it hasn't changed a great deal. There's anywhere between 500 and 1,000 applicants. They pick 150 odd, and you go to Perth, and out of that, we generally get 20. I still return to the unit today to mentor the new charges coming through, and the numbers haven't changed over time, which is good.
So let's say that's in the 90s. You obviously weren't born in 1980 because you would have been too young to be doing this. Were you in the military? What's that process? Joining the military, then trying for SAS, or you just decide one day I saw the SAS TV show series on Channel 7 or Channel 9, wherever it is, and I decided I want to become an SAS soldier? I mean, how does that work? I mean, how do you get the instinct and the ambition to join the SAS?
Yeah, it was a spark for me. I was going to be running out a full forward for Hawthorn football team up until I was 12 years old. That was my dream, or opening the batting for Australia. But I saw the images. You may remember Princess Gate, the Iranian embassy siege in the UK in 1980, and that flickered across a grainy black and white television set, and it just captured my imagination. And I read a bit in those days. I was reading from an early age, and I started reading some books about counter-terrorism and anti-terrorism. That was the golden era in the 80s. The aircraft hijackings and etc. So it was in the geist, if you like. It was in the background. And I just thought, whatever they're doing looks awesome and sexy, and they're all dressed in black. And the more I dug, the more I was intrigued, and the more I wanted to do it. So I joined the Army in 1986 as a regular. And when the SAS circus came to town and beat the drums, I signed up and started a selection process, pre-selection into that 150 proper selection. And then you go into a 18-month odd reinforcement cycle, which is still part of the selection. So it's probably all in a 2-year process once you're in the system.
I wouldn't mind just talking about it because I've always been fascinated with the process of being selected. And I guess you're also self-selecting too, because
correct,
you might decide I'm going to drop out as well. It's not just somebody saying you're the dude. You might say I'm not the dude. I want to go back to that in a second, but
self-selection is a really important part. It's a great insight.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Because it happens in business too, and people think they're going to be an entrepreneur, but ultimately you self-select yourself, and or the market will tell you whether you can do it or not. But some people fail to self-select out when they should be getting out. And it's not. By the way, there's nothing wrong with selecting to get out of these things. Self-selecting out, it's just what your instinct's telling you after you've gone through the process. It's not instinct without process.
Yep.
Process informs your instinct at the end of the day. But we'll come back to that in a second, because it seems like you have a view on it, a strong view on it. But you were I think you said regular soldier.
Yep.
What does that mean?
So you just join the ADF. You go into any number of corps, infantry. I went into Signals Corps. You can be in catering, transport, artillery, and so the regular, I suppose, process is the military picks you and where you'll go whereas the self-selection part of the SAS is entirely voluntary, and you hand yourself over to them completely. You don't really have much in the way of the hands on your own destiny, whereas in the regular army, you pick a corps, you get put in, and then you start a regular career in that way.
It's pretty full on. If you go back 40 years, which we are, to be, for a young man, to be reading articles about or reading articles about war and what's going on in the various territories, war territories, is pretty out there, pretty unusual. I would have thought back then, because I don't know anybody. I had one mate, Andy Nolan. He became an SAS guy, but that's the only person I know, and I don't even know how he became one. But he used to do some weird shit, though. I can tell you, like when it used to rain really heavy down in Rose Bay, he used to get into the after having, he's also an architect, but after having left the SAS, he used to get in a one-man canoe and get into the canals when the heavy rain was there, just to test himself.
Oh, is that right?
And go through really weird tunnels. I just think, and like he was the most unassuming person in the world. Like, you would never think. He was a mild-mannered architect.
Yeah.
But he went through the whole process.
Risk taker.
Yeah, a massive risk taker.
Yeah.
And just every now and then, when it's heavy rain, I'd see him. This is back in the 80s. He'd say, "Oh, I've just been going in the canals," and I mean, you fucking lunatic. What's wrong with you? Like, why
everyone else is in the pubs.
The canals are just wide,
Yeah.
like you need it's sort of like effectively rapids, because it's filling up with water down there in Rose Bay, and they end up out in the harbour somehow. But I don't know anyone who thinks this way other than him. And now I'm meeting somebody else. What is it that makes you inquire, or have such an inquiring mind that you start reading about this sort of stuff, and then makes you, when you mentioned the circus comes to town, the SAS recruitment comes to town, what was it that made you feel as though, yeah, this is for me, I'm going to have a crack at this?
Yeah, I've thought about this, and we've studied this, in fact, in the unit. But I resolved my thinking to, it's an internal competitiveness, there's an internal drive, which you would be very familiar with. It happens in the business world. I see it in the business world and sports. And I think the SAS in particular, it's the opportunity to test yourself, to see if you have what it takes. And you're not impressing anyone at that stage, because no one really knows about it. It's very done in-house, very much. But it's that drive to see, do I have what it takes? The more you read, you think, you question yourself, is this, would this suit me? And that kind of, in a way, attracts you even more. Some of the common characteristics that I've observed over time: high tolerance to ambiguity, and an appetite for risk taking, but it's generally quite measured. It's kept within the
informed risk.
Informed, and also a competence level of risk. You within your own competence, you have a good, sound understanding of the scope and your scope and limitations.
So it's not much as. So are you saying, though?
It's not reckless, I would say.
Right. In other words, it's not like. And that's actually quite an interesting point, because I noticed in the briefing that I got that a lot of the stuff you talk about, your book is the Fourth Pillar, your most recent book, The Fourth Pillar. But one of the things I noticed in the description of the book is modern stoicism. So what's interesting to me anyway is that you just mentioned the word reckless, and we'll come back to that. And one of the headings of your book is stoicism, and stoicism, of course, is thousands of year old virtue, like going right back to the Stoics, and Aristotle talked about stoicism, but you talked about recklessness, and then and Aristotle himself talked about the difference between courage and recklessness is somewhere in between the two.
The golden mean. Yeah.
What he called the golden mean.
Yeah.
It's not in the middle. It's somewhere else. And for each individual, it's different for everybody else. Someone might be closer to recklessness, and someone might be closer to courage.
Yep.
But it's definitely not recklessness. In other words, it's not, and fearless is different to courage. And do they, when you're training for the SAS, do they go through this virtue type deal, start talking to you about these old school things that they are old school? I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but old school virtues? Do you talk about these things? Stoicism, recklessness, courage, blah blah blah.
We do now, and back then it really was a matter of survival. And so if you were tough enough to wait it out, to run it out, to just persist, and in a very pure stoic fashion, just to be able to persist and put up with it.
Stand your ground.
Stand your ground. Don't complain. In fact, no one's listening anyway. It's a nil feedback environment, which is very, very harsh, and that's what makes something like tolerance to ambiguity such a valuable measure of someone who's suitable for service.
Use another
in SAS.
virtue word, tolerance.
Yeah, and so you need to survive, and but these days I actually go back and teach applied ethics to our junior operators, not only for the moral challenges that they will face in their careers, physical, mental, and moral.
You're talking about
challenges.
SAS.
Yep, in service. But back in those days, it was how hard you could go for how long, and what you could tolerate and put up with. So there's two kind of sides to that coin. My generation is the pure stoic, just put up with it and keep persisting. These days we have a more virtue approach to it, because we realise now that service in these kinds of units has a moral toll as well, and that gets mixed up with the mental health toll that it takes on people,
or the final outcome. Because you don't want people being all these things and then walk out and their career's finished.
Yep.
And all of a sudden they're a wreck.
Yeah, but inside, that's correct, exactly. And I'm as a psychologist now, I spend a fair bit of time in that. But I guess at the start of an SAS soldier's journey, what we want is to give some guidance around what is reckless and what is controlled and informed. And I think we always want to select people who are probably going to lean towards the reckless part, because the nature of the work is such that it's high risk, high consequence, catastrophic consequences, not only for ourselves but for the people around us. So we need people to be willing to step into that space without question, without being afraid, afeared, or without hesitation in most cases. So we want people who are probably that side of it. But I think the golden mean of Aristotle, if you will, it's a navigable space. What we also want is people to come back to a normal setting, a civilian setting, and readjust those parameters as well. And that takes a certain kind of person that we don't always get right, but I think we're pretty bloody good at it.
So recently Donald Trump announced, and Pete Hegseth announced, that they're going to change their Department of Defense to the Department of War, and got all sorts of reactions around the world. And initially I thought to myself, well, that might be good for recruitment, because recruitment's a big deal we don't have national service, and so recruitment's really a big deal and important to have recruits. It's not saying you want the whole country to come, join the army, or whatever it is, whatever the military is, but you definitely you got to recruit and or retain as well.
Yep.
And maybe that has a bit of marketing appeal to it. But how does that fit into the narrative in a modern day, in terms of the types of people it might attract, do you think?
Yeah, I think it can be a concern, and particularly in a nation like America, where they're on a martial footing, martial kind of culture. Australia, not so much. I'm not sure it would fly well here. I get the idea. We want to be proactive, I guess, in maybe at war rather than being defensive and on the back foot. And I heard a bit more. I think Hegseth punched out a semi-poem or something like that to romance Donald. But I don't know that it would make a marked difference on recruiting, or that would have to play out. I think what's important to state is during times of peace, recruiting naturally goes down. The boys that turn out to want to go on the adventures and go to war seem to spike when that's imminent or in the news. I've had a few people say, or ask me the question, is the Australian Defence Force in trouble and recruiting's down and all the rest of it? And I'd say, look, it's never as bad as it seems and never as good as it seems, and we probably need a more moderate conversation about it. But it's a lot of money to sustain a standing army that's not doing anything and not going anywhere. And if the example I give is at the end of World War One, a lot of the old guys were saying, because a lot of men died in World War One, and they were having a shot at the next generation coming through, saying they're all soft and weak, and they need to be trained up, and things like scouts and outward bound, and these Wilberforce and all these other things were invented to toughen up the next generation. And when the 16 and 18-year-olds went off to Kokoda track, they did a pretty bloody good job. And the young chargers I see come into contact with regularly, I think Australia's in good stead. I don't think we should panic. If we do need to raise an army, we'll do so. Our capability's still strong. This is the time to spend a bit of money on the hardware. And I think
hardware being tech.
Yeah, tech and hardware and some decent chips and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think Australia, I think we should just calm the farm a little bit on that. I think the essence of the Australian soldier is still here, and we'll serve our country well come the time.
So Harry, do you think that essence that you're talking about cuts across the Australian values? Do you think, because is that essence an Australian value? And given our immigration and our change in the sort of the makeup of our nation, and it's rapidly changing, probably faster now than it's ever done in its past, in terms of cultural changes, sense of nationalism, perhaps religious relationships. Like at one stage, we were pretty much a Christian nation. These days, we're much more mixed. Then there's conflict overseas relative to some of the religions relative to other religions. And it's pretty obvious who we'll be talking about, who I might be talking about or thinking about at the moment.
Yeah.
Do you think these things will ultimately create a bit of a chasm in our armed forces, our military?
Yeah, potentially. I think there's parts of the military which have been maybe distracted by what's going on out in society. So I give that, but. To fill and to have a strong standing Australian army, we need about 100,000 people, and I think there's well inside that many to service our military. And we'll always, remember we're a small nation. Our GDP and defence is tiny. It's probably the budget of the 1st Marine Division, and we're now one of America's, if not biggest, aircraft carrier, and the Marines are increasing in numbers. So I think, again, there are challenges, there's no doubt, Mark, from a broader society perspective. But I think I would like to see the kind of margins and the fringes discussions that I see in the veteran community going on, just kind of keep our powder dry. I think we should take comfort that we will still be able to raise a strong army that will do its job.
So do we need? And I mean, this is probably more a war strategy question, and I don't know if I'm overstepping the mark here, but because you're an on the ground guy, you're the guy who goes and does stuff like in a more tactical, and you undertake a strategic outcome, but you got to have to make changes.
Yeah,
as
the
an
SAS
SAS
is a strategic tool, a strategic
and you go in there,
capability.
but you got to make changes. You got to say, "Oh shit, this didn't work out the way we wanted to work out. We've got to do this tactically," and then make some quick change, quick thinking, and as a group. Do you think that we need as many regular soldiers, regular military people, as we have done in the past, given I'm not talking about SAS, I'm not talking about specialised people, I'm talking about regular guys and girls. Do you think we need as many these days, given what's going on, given what we see in Ukraine, what we're seeing in various other places, what's going on in the world at the moment, as we have needed in the past? In other words, drones and all those other things. So is the world war potentially more technological?
Well, definitely. It got technological very quickly back in the US Civil War. So that doesn't change. I think that's expected strategically, no matter what conflict we go into. There's probably good point to make here around the type of war that we might be engaged in. The wars that we've had recently and arguably since the end of World War II have been wars of choice, really. They haven't been wars that we've been invaded or we've chosen to accompany America or a coalition or UK, and they've been largely wars of choice. So they have a different context and a different requirement, especially when we're being asked for certain capabilities to travel overseas. And then there's wars like Ukraine, where that's not a war of choice for Ukraine. That's a war that arrives on one's doorstep, and you need to do whatever you've got to do. And I don't think it's controversial to say that they find themselves in a pretty conventional situation, and they need warm bodies. It kind of comes down to that. The technology matters, and it's been amazing to watch that, hasn't it? The adaptation and the little drone shops underground and whatnot. I've been fascinated by that. That's just human adaptability. But at the end of the day, they need warm bodies defending a line, dug in, and it takes you back to
World War I.
The US Civil War, where they started digging in and that's that was the precursor.
So it takes me back to Break and Morant. The first thing I think of, remember the Australian movie Break and Morant?
Yeah, I do.
And I think that was like in the Boer War or something.
It was, yeah.
And which is like 1890 or somewhere, like 19th century anyway.
That's right. Yeah.
And it was a very famous movie for those people who haven't watched it. A great movie, one of the great films that Australia government was actually able to, well, South Australian government was able to help fund, but they were sitting in trenches. And in those days, communication was done by a runner.
That's right.
Now communication might be slightly different, but
well, interestingly, in the Ukraine, K phones, so it's a landline.
Yeah. It's like a box with a wire.
That's
so
right.
Let's call it.
And they're targetable, and they're being used because there's EMF, electronic magnetic pulses and all this type of stuff being used, blanketing out communications, conventional communication. There's runners are being used
still,
and notes. So in the battle space, the forward edge of the battle area, the FIBA as it was called, in those trenches, there's notes and runners being used between pits and those types of things. So comms cord, you might never have heard of that, but 3 tugs means it's safe to come, and 2, and so all these in a conventional war that's not of our choosing. You don't get to use the full remit of technology and capability because there's an enemy that's just or the equal of yours.
Certainly got to make that presumption.
Buffering that, yeah.
You can't make any other presumption because more likely you could be wrong, and the gravity of that is a big deal.
Exactly, and so those wars of choice that I've been involved in, and
so which wars have you been? Where have you gone?
So I've served in the big 3: Timor, Afghanistan and Iraq over 11 over a period about a dozen deployments, and then other missions and other activities around the globe.
And what was your role, like, so to speak?
So I started off as a 6 IC and then ended up running a troop. So I was in a team, and I was the shit kicker, the junior guy in 1991, and then I was in the unit until pretty much till 2017. In 2015, I finished up on the teams as a team commander, or our Bravo, the senior sergeant role in the.
And we're talking SAS?
Correct.
Yeah. So what would maybe the role is probably not the right word, what would your function be of your unit? Would be to go and do something, catch someone, is surveillance, what would it have been?
Yeah, all of those things and more. So we're a special missions unit, so we greet or we address missions without precedent. So
what's
often that means that problems and attacks on or threats to the national capability and national interests of Australia without precedents, whether that's by terrorists, whether it's technical, humans, war fighting, all of those things. So I've worked everything from one up by myself in the streets of some shitty city in the world to
But what would your mission be? Would it be to capture someone or to watch
yeah,
someone or follow
might be
them?
surveillance or something along those lines, related to information and people, and then everything through to working as a 30-man troop on a more conventional direct attack or direct a more direct activity, jumping out of helicopters and blowing things in. The SAS gets a bit confused at times by the imagery we see
Movies.
and the movies, yeah, and it makes us look very one-dimensional. But we're not. We're anywhere, anything, anytime force, and everything that encapsulates.
Do you have to, in the course, to become, apart from being able to prove that you can, you're not going to panic when you go underwater or whatever those things you see in the TV shows.
Yep.
Apart from those things, in the learning process, what skills do they teach you apart from how to shoot and all those sort of things? But like obviously unarmed combat, whatever. But what other skills do they teach you? Like engineering skills, or you do a little bit of everything?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. Computer skills, code writing, language skills, right up to paramedicine, surgery, all the weapons, all the things that go bang. We do high altitude parachuting, which is everything, if you can imagine that as at its extreme, jumping from an airplane at 25,000 feet at night, wearing 500 kilos worth of kit.
Sounds like a lot.
It's a lot. And, you're jumping on oxygen. So it's a highly technical, highly high risk event. To rebreathing underwater, diving underwater and submarine release. And one thing Australia's really well renowned for is our long range vehicle patrols and capability. And all those three things, amongst others, they're really only means to get to the job. The majority of the SAS work is done in infill and extraction. The job itself is a whole other set of skills, and that's whether we take the expert and get them there safely, or we bring the skills and execute the mission on the ground as required.
Are you talking about that transport vehicle that I can't remember the name of it now, but we've sent quite a few of them to the Ukraine, I think.
Oh yeah, the ASLabs, I think, is that?
I can't remember the bloody name myself either. But but Australia's good at building those things. Is that because of our terrain?
Yeah, I think so. I think we were getting IED strikes in Afghanistan regularly and surviving a lot of them. So I think there was a technology that just evolved in a local place, and that's had a asymmetric kind of impact or certainly interest from around the world, and that technology spread. It's just V-shaped hulls. So I guess
at the bottom of the transport machine,
it still goes bang inside. Don't worry about that. Yeah. But the vehicles, it's survivable, more survivable.
It disperses the vibration,
That's
the impact.
Right. Yeah, the impact. Yeah.
So because you experienced it yourself, IEDs.
That's right. In 2000, I unfortunately was in 2008 drove over an IED, which turned out what we think was an old Russian anti-tank mine that was remote detonated, and a colleague of mine was killed beside me, and our interpreter effectively lost both of his legs in the blast. So it was very traumatic, and it's remarkable to think out of the dozens of strikes that we had in Afghanistan on the cars that we drove, very few deaths. I think we had 2 or 3, I think it was, over that time. A lot of injuries, etc., but high survivability. They weren't the vehicles. We had our own set of vehicles.
And what happened to you? Did anything happen to you?
Yeah, I had frag through the back of both legs and burnt. Actually, the force blew a boot off, an army boot off, just to give you an idea of the force, which I don't need much idea really, I guess. And I was actually okay. I had a bit of surgery and came back to the troop, but I contracted an infection. Most of Afghanistan's covered in human feces and animal feces.
Really?
And yeah. Well,
it's not like they've got bathrooms, lavatory systems.
They haven't had a huge sanitary advance there, but and they use it for fertilizer. Actually, to be fair to them, they reuse it for fertilizer. These are pretty humble existences. And so I got a staph infection, a golden staph infection that kind of got up into my
In
thoracic.
Afghanistan?
Yeah, it started there.
Yeah.
And I had to be repatriated in the end because it just that my testicles were swollen up to the size of a soccer ball, and it started to get into my thoracic cavity, and they were going to remove my leg, but they got onto some heavy drugs back in Perth. I was back just in time, thankfully, and over weeks it calmed down.
And would that have been a signal to you? Maybe it's time now I'll hang the boots up a bit.
Yeah, well, I was 40 at that age.
Is it a retirement age? Do they sort of say, mate, 40 is it?
There's two retirement ages. One is around 55 or so.
Yeah.
And the other one's the more realistic one, is when the young fellas say, Harry, fuck off. It's time for you to go. You were a bit slow. And a few times towards the end of my time, the guys did turn around and say, mate, you're looking a bit slow.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and you do.
Straight up.
Yeah, and your ego wants not to hear that. But
slow in terms of keeping up, you mean?
Yeah, definitely keeping up. Yeah.
Like you mean with a backpack and all the gear?
Absolutely, yeah. When you're getting gunshots fighting, you need everybody up in the line. And I never fell off or let anyone down, but there was a sense that it was harder than it should have been.
And is that their job to tell you that? Like,
I think it's all of our jobs to tell each other that. It's the SAS regiment's a prison yard you get to go home from. It's brutal. And but there's a camaraderie and respect. You don't have to be everyone's best friend, but you need to respect the fact that the bloke next to you's got what it takes to look after you, and he'll have your back when it matters.
Sounds like a footy team.
Yeah, it's a lot like a footy team. I work in AFL and NRL teams, and it is a familiar environment.
You want confidence that the guy next to you is not going to leave a gap, or if there is a gap, that he's going to close the gap.
100%.
And that he's going to run up the line all the time with you. And like every time you run up, he's going to run up.
Yeah, and we want to know too that if you're bleeding out in the AO, that they're going to do their best to get you home as well. That's a kind of a commitment that we make to all the families when we deploy as well.
And when you did make this decision to leave, you mentioned a couple of times you have psychology qualifications. Did you do that during your army period, or did you decide to go into psychology after that?
No, I took some advice of a man I call my kind of second father, Gary Kingston. I've mentioned him a lot in the book. He once said words to the effect of, "Don't let this place be everything you are. It's not all you are. You're more." And he was a great proponent of educating yourself, whether that was tertiary or builder carpentry or whatever it was. Do something else. Be something else. And I took that to heart. So I started studying seriously in the last 10 years. I was in the regiment. So I would joke that I'd have a book from a university book out on patrol with us, and be reading that and digging a trench. And while I was having a break, I'd be finishing a uni degree. And it didn't add any weight or any effort overseas. It actually gave me a helpful, healthy distraction away from planning all the time. And it just so happened in 2019, when I left the Defence Force full time, the weekend or the week after I started, I was qualified and registered as a psych, and I've been.
Oh, so you did that? You did that whilst you were in the military?
That's right. Yeah, last 2 years.
Like an online type course?
No. I attended psychology is a 7-year degree. The last 3 of which you need to do face-to-face supervisions and all this type of stuff. So,
like as in an intern type thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the military gave me a part-time gig and helped me do that. And the military's pretty forgiving like that.
Well, that's where the military is great. I mean, the Defence Force is generally great that way.
It is now, yeah. It is
to support people.
Yeah, it's much better these days.
Why psychology?
Well, it seemed to make a lot of sense to me. It was something else I was interested in. I kind of dropped out of uni after year 12. I was going to uni, and then I thought I'll join the army now or do uni and then join the army. That was a kind of conundrum, and I ended up doing the latter, doing the former. But it was a little bit unfinished business. I read a lot about psychology and philosophy. They were kind of my staples. I found them fascinating. Loved the stories that went behind them. It was it's just natural for me. It wasn't, I felt like, and it makes very good use of my lived experience now. When I work with mission critical teams or sports teams or hedge funds, I love working with hedge funds. I think they have a very similar vibe to them when they're up and running. A private capital team or a deal team you've got a dozen young men and women who just want to shoot the lights out. It's the few that I work with. Sometimes they feel like a footy team. There's that kind of camaraderie in the trenches fighting. So I think that my background, psychology, pulls it together, gives it an evidence base, and allows me to tell stories and share, hopefully, my small W wisdom with those people.
So when did you write? Because your first book, I think this is your first book, 11 Bats.
Yeah, my mates told me I should have called it Bats 11 because I'm a shit bat. So.
But what is that about? 11 Bats? What's that?
It's just an autobiography, Mark, of my journey from Williamstown, Victoria, to back to Victoria, really, where I end up at the end of that book at the MCG doing an Anzac Day speech, and the 11 bats. It was my habit to take a cricket bat every operation that we went on, every tour we went on,
and a ball, I presume,
and a ball, yeah, a few balls because they get a bit lost, Sean balls, and we'd play cricket. And we'd recreate, or we'd even gather information. We use them to gather intelligence and
cricket.
Yeah, absolutely. So
How?
you build rapport with the locals
Yeah.
playing a game of cricket, and they become an extra layer of defence. Or you go up to the street urchins who you've thrown them a ball or whatever, let them get you out, and you might just say, "Who's old mate over there? Who's he?" And they'll look after you. They'll come to knock on the door and say, "This such and such is bad man. He's back in town." That type of stuff. When I was looking after Alfredo Renato up in the hills of Malbisi in Timor Leste, he was the protagonist and antagonist. He headed the militia up there. He was the most interviewed person on the planet at one stage. CNN, ABC, Fox, everybody was coming to interview him, and there was a conga line. So we set up this game of cricket, and we needed to note everybody who came in to see him because there were spies running everywhere from all corners, from Portugal to the US, etc.
Clearly Indonesia.
And Indonesia, lots of them. And so we'd play a game of cricket, and everyone was forced to stop. We got photos, got a bit of narrative from them. Fingerprints where we thought there was a high threat, we'd just throw them a ball or give them a glass or something, just all in there.
Swap the ball over.
So there was all that kind of carry on.
So that was your sort of your go-to. 11 Bats being a cricket side.
That's right.
11 men.
Yep.
11 Bats. But you've played around with that because is that something that was your common denominator, I guess, from most of your deployments?
Yeah, I came home to cricket, to the Applecross Cricket Club, who I'm still available for selection there.
He's calling out.
That was a place to come home and be Moff, not Harry, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And my cricket mates grew to really deeply understand that, and they didn't bug me about my military service. I could just come home, be one of the blokes, a handy uphill into the breeze bowler, a normal human being. And I speak emotively about it because it played such a massive role in normalising life for me.
How does that work? You 1 minute you're in Afghanistan and you're trying to work out if someone's going to blow you up or do something terrible, and you're seeing all sorts of crazy stuff, and living with individuals who are the same milk. Then you come back to Victoria, and where everybody's just like running the local coffee shop and making bacon and eggs and digging ditches as a plumber or whatever, and your mates from school, I presume, and your cricket club. How's that transition work?
It's bizarre. It really is.
Must be bizarre.
We talk about being away. I ended up referring to being away like being at home, and being at home like being away. That was really how it felt. That makes so much sense to me. We go away to the unordered, extraordinary world, where things that happen shouldn't happen. We wish they didn't. Then we come back to this ordinary world you talk about of post office, milk bars, and
it's all structured. It's all organised. You get up at a certain time in the morning, get a coffee, everything's normal.
Yeah, less and less you feel under control. But yeah, so I remember walking the streets of a far off country, being one of the most dangerous jobs I'd been in decades or in years, on a Friday night, and I knew I was leaving in the morning. We'd finished up. I did the handover, got on the plane and got home. And on the Sunday, I was sitting at home the family dinner in Australia with the kids and Danielle, my wife, and we were having broccoli, mashed spuds and lamb chops. That was my welcome home dinner always, my favourite dinner. And the kids are arguing, and I just caught myself thinking, what the fuck, what's just gone on? My head's still there because I'm going, I wonder if Jono got to old mate in time, and I wonder if anyone got hurt on that particular part of the mission. I knew, and it takes a week or two just to stop wanting to, is everything okay? Do you need a hand? And you're walking the streets or jumping in and out. So it's a very, very hard transition. But my wife worked out very early on that I needed to get down to the club pretty quick. That was, it was a bit of a source of tension early in that period, but in my career, our marriage. But it's remarkable how well that social setting would buffer those. It would bring me back to earth.
It's like a decompression.
Absolutely, mate. It's a perfect word for it. Yeah, decompressing. And so when I go back and mentor young men now, I talk about your third thing. Your first thing's your family. Your second thing's your vocation, and really they get just wound up together inextricably. But you need a third thing, and that is you. Bugger the family, bugger the vocation. Where can I go just to be the real identity inside of me? Because in a lot of ways, the SAS facade, if you're not careful, it takes over.
Yeah, you become that.
You become that. And that's, this sounds strange. Let me say that's not an identity you want to carry around with you forever. That's something you want to be able to slip in and out of. And that's an agility that we talk about now, which is a discussion that we never had. And I think it's a really important discussion.
That's an interesting point. In terms of particularly business people or people, just people generally, when it comes to remaining relevant to society, if you see that as an important thing, that to some extent means that you can then follow how society is changing as opposed to just sticking in one spot and just being that person you think you are. Like our brain is interesting, and you being a psychologist know more about this than me, but our brain's very interesting in terms of how we build a story about ourselves, and everything we do, it then ends up becoming affirmation of the story we build about ourselves. And then sometimes we end up just living that life and get stuck, as opposed to making use of plasticity of our brain
and of our life. I love the word stuck, by the way.
Stuck.
It's the perfect word. Stuck in time, stuck in character, stuck in family, stuck in event or trauma, whatever it is.
Including trauma.
It's a perfect word.
Including trauma. And a lot of people suffer from this.
Yeah.
But our brain does have plasticity, and which basically means I can change things and change the story about myself and start affirming the new story about myself. And people often ask me about how do you stay relevant given changes? Like, one stage I worked at a law firm, and I had a mortgage business, and then I do broadcasting, this type of stuff. And how important is the willingness for an individual to be able to, you've done it, to be able to, I won't use a technical term, but use our brain to actually stay relevant, not me being relevant to an audience, just me being relevant to society. What can I contribute to my society? Not everybody, but my society. How important is that as a technique?
Yeah, I think it's very important, and you've hit on a couple of things. Yeah, the plasticity of the brain is a thing these days. It's labile is another term that's used. That applies to all aspects of us as humans. We're never ever static. We're allostatic. We're navigating the world, changing. We're not a beat of strings or a straight linear line. We're kind of, depending on which philosophy you want to talk to, process theory with Whitehead would talk about, we're spiraling through space, changing every second. And that's true. We're evolving or adapting as we go, which is the other point you raise. You are an highly adaptable person. Not everybody is. There's a biology behind our personality and our psychology, and some people are more tolerant to ambiguity. You would be someone like that. Founders, I find, I work a lot with founders and also with individuals who've started their own family office, high net wealth, who might be a bit stuck in their family, in the wealth and the intergenerational transfer, etc. But founders have a high tolerance to ambiguity, and they're under the same, I think, risk profile that they can get stuck in this persona that they've created for themselves. You know, the king of Collins Street or the king of Macquarie, and the
100%.
suit and tie. And I say, well, when was the last time you went and had a Friday night at the footy with your mates, your schoolmates? You know, because most of our schoolmates are still good, close community. And it's not surprising to hear them say, oh, months ago, or I don't really catch up, or I'm too busy, and Mark, I've sat, and you would, again, this is your area of expertise, but I've been surprised at how many, I don't know, I'll make a generalisation, but 60, 65-year-old men who've sold their business for a life-changing amount of money. To some it's 20 million, to some it's 200 million. And their life around them behind the facade has atrophied.
Yeah.
Their relationships have atrophied, their health has atrophied, their social connectivity, all that, and I could go on. And they feel it. They feel this like a sense of loss almost, or regret, or then it's not as a happy time as they had been imagining. I shouldn't laugh, but it's so I don't think it's just,
No, it's real.
It's very real, and so I don't think it's necessarily just the remit of veterans or sports athletes. Have the same thing.
Big time.
For every 100 athletes, one of them will make life-changing money and means.
Or become a TV presenter.
Or a TV presenter, exactly. But the other 99 who have sacrificed everything on the journey won't have that. So this is.
What do you say to them?
Well, you've got the very first thing any human needs to do if they want to change is do a NAV check. Where are you at right now? And let's be realistic.
But at what
it.
point? Like before they get to the retirement point, or?
Well, I can only go off when they first come to me, if I'm working to them, and I do a bit more of that than I would have expected these days. But it's a reality check, a fish slap, mate. Wake up. You know, let's where are we at? You know, and there's any number of means. And I'm from the Maslow kind of school of psychology, where I'm not there to provide solutions, and no psychologist should be. We're here to get it out of you, as Plato says. All information exists within us. It's just up to us to find it. And so I become the midwife to your, birthing your understanding of yourself. And I think with that facade too, sometimes, and as our life's atrophying behind it, there's a distance with ourselves that we create. And you alluded to that earlier about how we look for reassurance that we're on the right path. And I think when the soldiers that I see, particularly special forces soldiers, if this is all they are, this character, if they don't have this kind of deeper sense of connection to community or to citizenry, as the ancient Greeks might put it, then it's very hard work to kind of pull them back.
Is there a trade-off though between, and I have no idea, but I'm just wondering, is there a trade-off between the effectiveness of particularly a specialised soldier like an SAS person, and their identification of themselves as being this person? Is there a trade-off between that person being really effective at their job, but therefore as a result of that being less effective in terms of looking at the bigger picture for when the day they retire?
Yep.
And is there a sort of a process where it's when they're first starting, they're really effective when they're, 28, 29, whatever the age is when they first kick it off, and as they start to reach 40, does the Army or does the Defence Forces try and do this for them so that they just become more effective as a citizen on the way out?
I love it, mostly. And we haven't done a great job of that with my generation. So I probably see more people stuck there. In fact, what you talk about is exactly what the book is about.
Oh, cool.
It's about the fourth pillar is the philosophical pillar. The other three pillars in any high performance program on the planet are built largely around the three pillars: physical, psychological, and social pillars. And that's whether they mean to or not. And so the fourth pillar, I argue in the book, is a philosophical pillar. To your question, we can do both at the same time. And we can learn from the Greeks here, the agogis of the ancient Greeks, whether they be the Spartans or going back further pre-Socratic Heraclitus times, when they grew warriors or soldiers, they went off to these agogis, and they were schoolhouses to train not only military martial skills, but they learnt erudition, history, geography. They learnt storytelling, dance, poetry, and the reasons for dance and poetry. And they learnt about a respect for life and how to take a life, and the respect for that life, and how they're not in competition. They're actually mutually inclusive. And they learn about how to be a good citizen and what that means. The advantage that they had is that the warrior cultures were embedded in the society, because these are societies on war footings permanently, aren't they? If you can imagine the Greek societies. And in some ways we still are today. But I think that we can learn some lessons, and I try to tease that out in the book. What are the lessons that we can learn? And as I said earlier, when I sit with young soldiers now, I try my hardest to make that point to them. One of the first conversations I have with a young SAS soldier is, what's your plan B? You've got about a 50% chance of being here after 10 years. So, what's your plan B? The reality is that in this room of 20, 5 of you won't be here in 3 years' time due to matters outside of your control, because the job's tough like that. And so it's a bit of, a fish slap. This is where you're at. You're back to the bottom again. You're coming in, and we expect you to be elite with guns, languages, and technology. We also expect you to be elite at personal administration, personal life, being connected to the community. Doesn't mean you have to go and serve on boards or anything like that, but it just means you have to have a good sense.
Just be a member of a cricket club.
Yeah,
or something.
I think it sounds, as flippant as it sounds.
Yeah.
Crochet, cricket, or canasta club, as I say. Get out and let civilians reflect back to you that this is what you're coming. Eventually we have to return to it. So,
and I guess what you've got to teach them is an openness to be that person.
Yeah,
because a lot of them probably think, no, I can't be that person, because that might create weakness in me in my current job.
Yep.
My current role is I cannot have any weakness in me whatsoever, because I'm going out there against whoever
need to
the
be
enemy
stoic
is.
to the nth. Yeah.
But at the same time, I think you can be. I'd be interested to hear what you got to say. I think you can be open but not be weak. I think actually openness to me is a strength. It makes you stronger.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It makes you more of a whole person, which means you're probably stronger.
Absolutely. And you want to combine the king and the philosopher. The wisdom is embodied in the courage, in the ability to be able to switch from compassionate father and lover at home to a warrior who can be brutal and deliver violence when required. I hope I'm a kind of living proof of that. And the majority of SAS soldiers that I've served with, I would say, embody that. They're compassionate, good men who are also able to do things that they're asked to do in the interests of the national security. And
so today, the sorts of things you do, I mean, I presume, hopefully this is the case, you are doing, you go out and do talks and this sort of stuff. People can book you to do not a speech, but like a talk to a group.
Yeah, do
corporates, etc.
Yeah, lecturing. I don't do a heap of keynote speaking, but I do a bit here and there for corporates are pretty happy to hear or keen to hear the stories. But I do spend a lot of time with young soldiers. One thing I'd like to do is set up a program and an institute where soldiers from all across the journey, from civilian to elder, without going into it too deeply, can come and discuss and share stories. And I think that's something that's missing. There's an old kind of proverb I'll be very quick with. The soldiers once would go away to war. They'd be away for a long time. It's along the lines of Homer's return to Ithacus, Odysseus, the Odyssey. But the warriors would at 16 they'd be trained up, they'd go off to war, and then they would come home. And the young warriors wouldn't come straight home. They'd be left on the edge of the village, and they would be left there to process the events, to celebrate the successes and commemorate the losses, to share stories about what they'd been through. And the village would come out to them, share food and say, when you're ready, we're here for you. And the elders and the spiritual leaders would come out and help them process and sit and listen to them. And then when they were ready, they would come home. And it's this kind of decompression, this sense of decompressing and processing the experiences. And I think in the modern world, we're in such a bloody rush. And this is not only for veterans, this is for our police, our emergency services. They live in the extraordinary world, and it's something that we don't do well to transition them back to the ordinary world, which for anyone listening in the mission critical teams, it's a wonderful world. Back in civilian world, there's a great place to be. And I think that's something I'll be looking at in the future. Well, we're not in the future, we're doing it now, to help to share those stories. And I'm not sure what it looks like yet, but at the moment it's fireside chats and those discussions that you alluded to.
And then your T-shirt says Stoughton.
Stoughton, yeah.
Just explain what that is. That's obviously your business name, but what is it?
Yeah, Percy Cerity, who's one of the themes or one of the characters in the book, I think the greatest coach of all time. He owned a dozen world champions and gold medals and world championships out of a tin shack in Portsea. He was a prolific writer and reader, and he had a philosophy called the Stoughton philosophy, which is a portmanteau or a blended word from Stoic, S-T-O, and Spartan, and that's the T-A-N. And he put those words together. He believed the Stoic philosophy was good, but it was found wanton in terms of an embodied philosophy, so the physical training aspect. So he thought the Spartan agoge approaches was the missing piece to Stoicism to make it complete for an athlete, which he believed was the purest and the highest order of humanity. And that's I borrow that for my business name.
And that's something obviously you believe. It's funny, you're just talking about a moment ago about like a decompression process of putting people outside the village and the village coming to them, and letting people just sort of stay outside the village until they're ready to come in. And you mentioned Odysseus or the Odyssey, well, Homer's story. Allegedly it was Homer, who we don't know actually who wrote it, but let's say it was Homer.
Yep.
And it seems like that whole Odyssey was, for Odysseus, was a decompression process for him to get back into society, back in Ithaca, because he just finished the Trojan War. He just came out of the Trojan War, and between wherever Troy was and getting back to Ithaca, which is on the other side of Greece, on the western side of Greece, he had to go through a whole lot of adventures.
That's right.
And maybe have you ever thought about this? Maybe Homer was writing a story about decompression and getting back into society.
I hope so, because that's the model I apply.
Oh, really?
It to me. Yeah. Well, I absolutely do. And the monsters, the Cyclops, and the sirens, and all the
temptations,
the temptations, are all the monsters from within.
they're the human effects.
Yeah, very Freudian kind of. So these are the monsters and the demons that he wrestles with to get home to his beloveds and back to being back to citizenry. And yes, I do, and I think that. But it's funny that it's not funny. It's curious that in other indigenous cultures they have similar stories about the warriors coming home and how they will There's a theory about World War One, which I think's very rubbery, that the ship trips home, the trips home in the ships, helped some veterans or some of the soldiers to process the long trips. I don't think the research backs that up, but it's, again, I think it would have been helpful for some. And I'm not even sure that making room to process can completely address anything. There's the bruised apples theory that you roll them down the stairs, enough stairs, and the bruises don't kind of heal. But it's another model I use is the oak table. A veteran is like a beautiful old, hundreds of years old oak table. You're going to take that over the IKEA every day of the week. Yeah. It's battered and bruised and been burned on the corners and chipped and grandpa had to saw a bit off and add a new bit
It's got
on.
lots of stories and lots
Brilliant
of
stories,
history and provenance.
Exactly. And it's that patina
Yeah.
that we all carry that we should be really embracing. And the metaphor of the village, or the metaphor of Homer for veterans, that's kind of the staple to my stories. And as I said, it's not only, I've realised now, that it's not only the mission critical teams, police, emergency services and first responders, but it's also athletes. I think it's a useful conversation. And also I think it's a useful conversation for burnt out private credit team.
Well,
God,
100%.
I've got a number of 40-year-olds I'm working with at the moment that I'm saying, are you sure this is the right job for you? You shot the lights out, but it's taken a toll, and you've got to stop and assess that at some stage.
I know one 40-plus-year-old that you do look after, and he's a mate. You need it. I won't say his name, but he has that in the chair.
Does he?
Yeah. So you need more of Harry. And by the way, you're lucky you got Harry. Harry, thanks very much. I really appreciate it. And this is the fourth pillar. This sort of reading is not what generally I would expect to get from a veteran, an ex-SAS person, but the wisdom and from what we're just discussing, because I haven't read the book yet, but the wisdom and the whole discussion around how we look at our lives, not as a veteran, but as anyone who's retiring from anything. Yeah. That's really important, because I've been through that process myself, wondering, well, hang on a minute. I used to identify myself as a certain type of person, and I actually got quite ill for about 3 months, very sick. And because there was a full stop put in my career voluntarily, but I didn't realise how much I thought I was that person.
Yeah,
and
okay.
It took me, years to work it out. I'm lucky; I'm much older now, but it took me a long time to work that stuff out. And I was one of the lucky ones because I had good support around me, etc. Yeah. But I recommend someone read these things. And if you're a partner of somebody who's in the same category, this is a great type of insight. This type of insight is what we need to read. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Thank you.